Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I appreciate you. Also, apparently, I forgot to get my camera all sorted before I switched scenes. But we're here. And I appreciate all of you for joining me this evening. Alright. Tonight we are going to be reading chapters 14 and 15 of To All Things an End. I initially thought that they were the final chapters, but it turns out that they are not. There are more chapters that I need to edit and get posted so we can read them. Alright. I'm just going to turn the music down just a little bit, at least on my end. Actually, you know what? It's probably fine. Alright, but welcome everybody. Okay. To All Things an End. Chapter 14. Before I actually dive in, I'm just going to remind everyone that I do have some stream commands, so if you notice me rubbing my eyes, or if you feel like I need to hydrate because I've been talking too much, I do have a command for those. It is down in my panels underneath the stream if you're curious. And you can feel free to use those at your leisure. It's not disruptive. I promise you it's not. I actually would appreciate if people would remind me to hydrate, because that's a really bad habit of mine to not hydrate. So please, feel free to use the commands if you so desire. And you can also feel free to play with the chat cat that's down below me on the screen. That's there for you guys to play with. Alright. And I'm going to hydrate a little bit before I actually start reading. Alrighty. To All Things an End, Chapter 14. The next morning, Micron set out to find Stefan and Zane, while Ari headed for their office to see what she could do to push the timetable a bit on the bureaucratic side of things. She knew that war was coming. The Jedi knew it was coming, and the Senators knew it was coming. It was a question of how soon they would be willing to coerce the money counters into funding it. Trusting his senses, Micron Din followed his feet back to the Jedi Temple and the Room of 1,000 Fountains. There, he found Stefan perched once again upon the lip of the central fountain and playing a mournful melody upon his ancient flute. Mick let the music flow throughout him as he approached. He could feel currents and eddies in the rivers of the Force flowing into and through the Katani as he played. He stopped to meet it before the master and allowed his mind to flow freely along the river. He caught a glimpse of warriors training, of snow and ice, and of Bane. "He's calling us out, isn't he?" Mick asked as the music came to an end. "He is," Stefan said quietly. "I thought Jedi weren't supposed to make things personal," Mick asked, seeing Stefan's expression. "We don't," the Katani answered as he gestured for Mick to take a seat. "I do. Something my father told me before I started training. You can't take emotion out of all your decisions and act as a Jedi. It is impossible. You listen to your heart as well as your head. Training, experience, and sense helps you overcome the darkness." "Smart man," Mick observed as he sat down. "He was. Started teaching me many things before I began training at the academy." "And Bane?" Mick asked. "The first time it had been personal with me and another Jedi," Stefan told him. "I never did figure out why, but it seems like he wanted to take it up more." "The other Jedi?" Mick asked. "A good friend of mine from the academy named John Aloran. When we stopped him the last time, Bane told us it was only the beginning. I have no idea why he chose to make it against the two of us more than any of the others. John can't figure it out either, and we never considered tracking him down. Now, we're both in a mad dash to find him. We'll find him, Mick said with a grin. Question is, what do we do when we find him? He wants a fight, Stefan said as he stood up. We'll make him wish he stayed under a rock. Mick couldn't help but grin even more. Ari's office. General, her aide said as he stayed in the doorway. What have you got, Lieutenant? Ari asked as she was downloading her latest messages to her datapad. Admiral Drayson is here with a visitor to see you. Go ahead and send them in, she said as she stood up, straightening her uniform as Drayson walked in. The guest was right behind him. Ari recognized him immediately. Admiral DeSoto, Ari said as they shook hands. I'm glad that you could make it, though I'm not sure why you both needed to see me. Hiram DeSoto was the senior fleet commander for Catan's Navy and their first battle group commander. He wore the black duty uniform jumpsuit that their personnel wore while deployed. He set a data pad on the desk and took a seat with Admiral Drayson. Well, you know that New Republic intelligence and our Navy collaborated on a new fleet ship. The Hikana class, I know it, Ari said, remembering the general idea of the class. I read the after-action report on Calbrea and thought that Kira exceeded the design plans in action and then some. We developed them for intel gathering as well as the special operations that Kira was part of, Drayson mentioned. And we tasked all of the ones we built for both of our fleets with trying to track down the transports that we had noted leaving the Bothan mobile suit production facility. And? Ari asked, hoping for a positive answer. You won't believe where we found them, DeSoto said. Endor. Are you serious? She asked him. The Bothans attempted a sense of humor. If it is, I'm not laughing, Drayson told her. Our people have gone over the data and projected that they've got more ships amassed than we thought. He pulled up the file in his datapad and handed it to Ari. It almost made her heart sink as she read over the projection. There's no way the New Republic can get enough ships together, she said, looking it over once more. If I shift over resources to match this, someone will see it as an opportunity to pull anything they want. We can't do it. That's the second reason I'm here, DeSoto said, smiling. The battle group commanders have been in session with the Joint Command and His Majesty. Our fleets aren't as stretched as the New Republic's, and we can bring 4 battle groups into theater here. That'll definitely be an improvement, Ari said as she did the math. Now, we need to figure out how to blunt the mobile suit force they've been putting together. The first transports from Catan should arrive at Designer Cadre's facility tomorrow, DeSoto told her. It completely caught Ari off guard. Transports full of what? She asked. When were you going to tell me? Ari yelled over the noise of machinery assembling the framework of the Falcon mobile suits while others started inserting all the different system components. Did you not read the messages that Stefan and I sent? Nib yelled back over the noise, looking over the schematics. Ari took a moment to pull out her datapad and reviewed those. When did you two decide this anyway? Yesterday, she heard behind her, causing her to turn around and see Stefan walking up to join them. Brother, you have been the strongest opponent of anyone having armed mobile suits, Ari said as she waved towards the ones being assembled. What's this then? A snub fighter has no chance against one of those. You know that, Stefan told her. The Bothans had to have been building theirs for a while to have the numbers that they have. We can't just throw squadrons of X-Wings and Z-Wings against them. They'll be overmatched. And what about bringing the pilots up to speed? Ari asked him. The Phoenix Squadron pilots flew these before, Nib told her. Brinks had them in refresher sims all day. Andre's helping train other pilots who show the right reaction times. And who's going to lead them? You are, Stefan said, gesturing to the hangar space at the end of the line, where a different suit was being built. Archangel is being rebuilt as well. You know your place is going to be leading them. Andrew will be right there with you in Blue Talon. So fast now. Ari couldn't help but think to herself. Aye, it is, Stefan said, picking up on her thought. But we don't have much of a choice. Back in the temple, Zan scowled. Yeah, keep your saber and rippers handy. Callista's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't question it, sensing his seriousness. Understood. She drained the rest of her mug before setting it down and hefting her helmet. We'll have to fill Master Card in later. I think he was looking for us earlier. Zan was already starting to put on his helmet, but when she said that, he stopped and blinked. Further developments? Callista shrugged. It's possible, though it's just a feeling I got from him. Nothing concrete, and it can wait. Getting those sabers back is a priority. Zan nodded and put on his helmet before making sure his guns were secure. He pulled them out and checked the power levels, and then, once satisfied, he put them back in their holsters with a flourish. It was unconscious, but the sense was that he trusted them as much as his lightsaber. Callista noticed this and smiled. While she felt confident with her own rippers, she was still learning how to handle them, but she knew her saber should be her last resort. They had to keep up the guise of mercenaries as long as possible. With a sigh, she finally pulled her helmet on. I'm as ready as I'll ever be. Right. Let's get going then. Just keep your head up and remember to act like a bounty hunter, especially when we get down to the red light district. Callista chuckled, slightly nervous. I'll do my best. With one last glance around the apartment, she followed Zan into the corridor. It was still early, and the temple corridors were quiet. That was a good thing, she supposed. They made their way out of the temple and proceeded to an old airspeeder that Zan had procured for missions just like this. It was a piece of junk in every respect. Callista eyed the craft warily for a moment, noticing Zan's confidence. Are you absolutely sure that Ossicla-looking thing will fly? She asked skeptically. She looks like Ossic, and that's the point. But the engines are kept in top shape, and since we're going 85 levels down, it shouldn't draw attention. Again, her eyebrows rose. Not drawing attention would be a big help, she replied with a small smile as she slipped into the passenger area. She had to admit she was still nervous about facing so many mercenary types. With a breath, she opened herself briefly to the Force and released her apprehension. It would only hamper her focus. She settled back and scanned the airways carefully via her HUD and with the Force, looking for anything out of place as they slowly descended to the depths of the massive city planet. The lower they went, the darker it became, as the never-ending buildings created their own canyons that swallowed the light from above. It's said that light, unless artificial, never hits the surface of Coruscant, and that's why the scum chooses the lower levels. Easier to blend into shadows than to stand out in the light, Zan told her. Callista frowned. There is less chance of being discovered that way. Thank the Force for infrared and Force sense, she replied, trying to find something positive in all the gloom surrounding them. Zan nodded. What do you feel down here, Sierra? Tell me what the mood is like down here. She frowned. Gloom, despair, and greed. She felt her eyes drift closed, trying to pinpoint the origin of the sensations for a moment before she pointed, unknowingly indicating the same general area Mick had been the day before. Zan nodded. Hence why we remain on guard and use a more aggressive mindset down here. The weak don't last in these depths. Niche, Callista said softly as she carefully scanned the promenade as they neared the area. It looks sparse. That's generally not a good thing. But being where we are, sparse could be the norm. I'd still advise caution. Rhoda's likely got watchers out. I sent him a comm a day back and informed him I was coming. I suspect we'll have a slight encumbrance in our path soon. Is that wise? She asked curiously, her finger slipping down to her holster ripper as she scanned the promenade once more. After a moment, she saw a flicker of movement off to the left of the cantina. Zan, there. She nodded towards it. Zan nodded only slightly and sent her a mental pulse. Follow my lead. But Zan hadn't pulled a weapon yet of his own. He was acting like this wasn't out of the ordinary. I see Rhoda can't even send out his lackeys properly. I should have tried this stuff closer to the Revenge. I might have had a better chance there, Shuta. Callista grinned nervously under her helmet. Slowly, she moved her hand away from her ripper, but it remained within easy reach. 6 hulking figures closed around the speeder, brandishing weapons that just looked painful. They were huge, obviously from some high-gravity world. One of them spoke, his voice deep as if it was from a chasm. Rhoda wants to see you. Come with us. Zan shrugged. I've never had an escort before. It sounds like Rhoda's hide is a bit twitchy. Zan looked towards Callista briefly, and the sense was that if he could have, he would have winked. He then turned back to the hulking brutes. Lead the way. And with a gravelly tone in his voice, he added, I insist. Her eyes widened slightly as she caught onto his train of thought. Zan, what skifter have you got up your sleeve this time? She wondered, eyeing the large men. They outweighed both Jedi by several kilos apiece. With a grunt that sounded more like rocks tumbling against one another, the one that had spoken turned, the rest of his men encircling the pair as they led them to a lesser-used side entrance to the cantina. Experience, Sierra. Just trust me. Zan thought towards her in reply, and a hint of humor accompanied it. Meanwhile, Zan's HUD scanned the room and noted entrances and exits. Let me guess, the fat sack is in the back rooms. Can't let the customers see him and throw up, right? The man turned back to Zan, his eyes glinting dangerously. Be careful how you speak of him, Mando. If he so orders, I can crack that arm of yours and see if you are so brave without it to protect you. Try me, fat boy. You forget who my employer was, and he wasn't stupid, unlike your boss, Zan said deliberately, antagonizing him. It was there that Callista got the first indication that Zan was not an out-and-out lightsider. There was darkness, and it seemed to be something well used, but at the same time the darkness didn't consume him. Her eyes narrowed, but then her lips quirked. That reminded her so much of Mick. Mentally shaking herself, she refocused just as the man's fingers tightened around his weapon, but his knuckles were white. Your employer was a shuta, he growled. Couldn't even foil an assassination attempt against himself, and with that the man spit at Zan's feet. I should kill you now and save Rhoda the trouble. Zan acted quickly, kicking the big man in the back of the knee and forcing him down. In the blink of an eye, Zan used the liquid cable on his gauntlet for his grappling hook to wrap it around the man's throat, so he was still hunched over. You were saying? He grated, tightening the cable around the man's throat. His eyes bugged out in surprise, and his fingers scrabbled at the cable around his throat, which only succeeded in drawing his own blood. It seems that I was mistaken, he gurgled, his gaze burning into Zan's visor. Zan released the pressure on the cable and reeled it back into his gauntlet. Injerkad Shah Mandawad Bertia, which roughly translates as don't mess with Mandalorians. He growled. If you're done trying to play, then do your job before we get antsy. The man grunted, eyeing Zan sideways before he stood and shook himself. Fine, then, he growled, his posture transmitting anger. After a moment, he pushed through the inner door and led them down a long, dim corridor before entering a large room at the end. And atop a low dais was what Callista could only assume was Rhoda. Zan took one look at him and growled. I guess what they say is true about you. You took on your parents' fatness and have none of his smarts. Ho ho ho, Rhoda laughed, the deep sound vibrating in Callista's teeth. You think you know all, Mando? I know many things that you do not. Oh, like how to raid a couple of stupid Sith that got killed by that Jedi and how to steal something from dead men before CSF swoops in? He shrugged. Color me unimpressed. Rhoda stopped laughing at Zan's tone. I see nothing gets past you, Mando. So what if I did? It's too late now. My employer thinks otherwise. He wants what you took, and since he hired me, I'm going to get it, Zan said, now outright lying, but not revealing anything other than the image the Hutt would be used to by now. Rhoda's eyes narrowed. You will try. You forget you are in my territory now. You won't get out easily. And who's your friend? Zan looked at Callista and sent a mental pulse. Time for an undercover name for you. He shrugged. Anija Ordo is the second best bounty hunter in Merc on the side of the Maw, and one that helped me deal a little damage to your glitter stim factory on Nar Shaddaa last year. Or did you forget about that? Zan was speaking half-truths now. While he had done as he claimed, and it was known that he worked with another Mandalorian, Rhoda and the other Khajiitics still knew the other still didn't know the other Mandalorian's name. And even if Rhoda wanted to find the truth, the accomplice, Merrick Bevan, died in a skirmish with the Hapans on Zalori. Oh ho! Rhoda eyed Callista with a calculating glance, but it wasn't the normal one that someone would give an adversary. No, he was contemplating how she might look in a slave girl outfit. The thought alone made him salivate. Even though Hutts were immune to force abilities, Callista still caught the gist of the thought and shuddered, working to keep her from going for her ripper right then. Try it, fat boy, and I'll bounce your carcass off the walls of 500 Republica and the Galactic Senate before I immolate you. But then again, I wouldn't need to, since she can do that herself. After all, Double Remus used her too. Callista's eyebrows rose. Zan was really laying it on thick. It seems even Del Remus can't control his women, Rhoda said, knowing it was a dig. Del knew the real value of the best people, which is why he always succeeded in his lifetime and even after his death. Something you have yet to do, Jabba's spawn or not, Zan said. Now, are you going to cut the poodoo and tell me what your price is, or do we need to start cracking heads? Rhoda fell silent for a moment. 50 million. And you bribed the CSF to stay off my hide. Zan blinked. 50 million? Sabers aren't that valuable. Something's in play here, he thought, and shared the general thought with Callista. He gambled. 50 million, Evan? CSF is fine, but then I could just as easily tell the Sith you still have the real thing they misplaced. Rhoda laughed deeply. What makes you think I'm not already playing both sides? He stopped and reached into a vat at his elbow, withdrawing a writhing creature that he popped into his mouth. That's disgusting, and I've seen all sorts of things, Callista thought to herself. Maybe we were right about the message cylinders, she thought to Zan. Zan inwardly agreed, but kept his focus on Rhoda. Playing the Sith, Rhoda? Unlikely. Sith deal with no one without getting what they want. Mandalorians have more experience being their allies than the Khajiitics do, and you have no intelligence to play both sides. That means you found something you want, right? He looked to Callista and then back to Rhoda. See what I mean? All blob and no bite. Callista chuckled, piercing Rhoda with a look. He's not cooperating. I say we take it and go, get this job done cleanly. She left that hanging. Zan would have smiled broadly, but the helmet concealed it. Last chance, Rhoda. Be reasonable, or we'll have a bit more fun. However, he noticed a shadow at the rear of the room and felt something wrong, but it was hard to pinpoint. Callista, too, sensed something out of place. Her hand drifted towards her rippers. Rhoda glared at them, narrowing his beady eyes. You can try, but even I have my moments. You won't leave here alive. Callista's hand closed firmly around her ripper, and for a moment she dared to let her eyes drift closed, relying on the Force as she concentrated on the feeling of the Sith sabers. They were definitely in the room. Zan stayed still for a moment and tried to see if they were the real target. He felt that while they were considered fair game, they weren't the real targets. You really are an idiot, Rhoda. Lead the Sith here and now misunderstand their tricks? He kept his hands free, knowing that as much time as he could buy for them, the better. Callista would need it, as she wasn't as skilled in this type of mission as he was. Callista only half heard the conversation, for she was more concerned with finding the sabers themselves, and a moment later, she did. The vat at Rhoda's elbow. Grimacing beneath her helmet, she sent Zan a picture of it. That's where they are. Zan made no outward reaction, but now he knew how valuable Rhoda thought they were. Listen to me carefully, Rhoda. If you're smart, you'd kill your so-called allies right now, 'cause if not, then they're going to kill you. Rhoda let out a harsh laugh, but it didn't seem as confident as before. I have my own insurance policy, Mando, he said smugly. Your funeral, then, Zan said simply and backed up a bit. He figured with a bit more room the Sith would take little time to strike. Bit too overconfident against the Sith, don't you think? Callista snorted. He obviously doesn't know what they're capable of. She dropped her hand to her own weapons once more, readying herself. Then Zan felt it and nearly laughed. And it was yet time for another white lie. He growled, I see why, now, and it proves how much of an idiot you really are, Rhoda. You think wiring the building will stop them? Or us? Rhoda's fat lips puckered for a moment, and then he was silent. But Callista could sense his terror. He'd grossly underestimated both his adversaries. With a smirk, she began scanning the room carefully, keeping an eye on the back entrance. That dark feeling was still there. I'll go for the sabers? She suggested to Zan. Zan mentally nodded and readied himself to pull his own saber. You know, Rhoda, not only are you stupid, but you also miscalculated. You never did get your homework well. Too bad that you'll never know how dumb your last mistake was. And with that, he touched the force and broke the vat by Rhoda's side. He was springing the Sith into action. The first one reacted by immediately decapitating Rhoda himself. As the first Sith lunged at Rhoda, Callista was right beside him. As his blade followed through on the arc, she body-checked him out of the way and seized the sabers before ducking out of reach, her hand drifting for her own hidden lightsaber. She didn't pull it yet, though. Zan's saber wasn't in his hands yet, as he was now firing his rippers at the rushing guards. Only one Sith raced out to retrieve the sabers, and Zan knew it was harder deflecting slugs than it was blaster bolts. Calica, engage him. I'll deal with the guards. She pulled her saber with a curt nod, deftly depositing the Sith blades into the hidden compartment. An instant later, her violet blade hissed into existence. So, you want to play, Hutun? She growled at the Sith, reaching for the Force and that focus she'd had before during her training with Stefan. The Sith glowered at her and didn't say a word. Instead, he slashed at her left flank and then reversed the strike to... Oh, dear. I'm gonna stop there. We are in an ad break. My bad. Sorry, ad break. That gives me a chance to hydrate, which is always good. Also, welcome to anybody who may be lurking and listening. I appreciate you. Sorry. The commercials are a bit weird sometimes. I have no control over what they are. So I apologize for that, but welcome in. Yeah, the commercials are a bit crazy. I appreciate you being here nonetheless. Thank you. Um, okay. Sorry, I lost my spot because I was still reading when I realized that we had an ad. Okay. Here we go. She pulled her saber with a curt nod, deftly depositing the Sith blades into the hidden compartment. An instant later, her violet blade hissed into existence. So, you want to play, Hutun? She growled at him, reaching for the force in that focus she'd had before during her training with Stefan. The Sith glowered at her and didn't say anything. Instead, he slashed at her left flank and then reversed the strike to her right leg in response. Clearly, Don Mok was something that the Sith wasn't skilled with. Callista grinned, exposing her teeth behind her helmet as she saw a multitude of holes in his attack. Letting out a breath, she whipped her leg back, presenting him with a profile before she leaped at him, keeping her blade close until the last instant. Here, she swung it in a tight arc, batting his own aside to bury hers in his chest. She blinked, but didn't have time to contemplate as she pulled her blade free and then stalked towards the next one. Zan had his hands full, clearing the guards when someone yelled, "Get the explosives!" Zan groaned. Fairvik, they still haven't learned. He tried to stretch out in the force, but the chaos in the room made it impossible to feel where the explosives had been placed. He swore again. Just as he finished killing another guard, yet another Sith popped up out of nowhere. Callista was having problems of her own. 3 Sith were trying to corral her into a corner, and she was having none of it. It took her all of her concentration to hold them off. Zan, we need to go. If we stay... Do you have the sabers? He growled as he lit his own lightsaber for the first time and began to engage the assassin that was stalking him. Alec, she grunted, and the strain in her voice was apparent even through the force as she flicked her blade back and forth, barely holding off the Sith who were charging her. Get clear, then. I'll hold the line until you do, Zan said in between saber strikes and blocks. Go! Nodding wordlessly, Callista parried the next attack and thrust her blade forward, impaling one of her attackers before she scooted away from the next attack and broke for the entrance. You better be right behind me. Zan kept the Sith at bay as the first explosions rocked the building, upsetting the balance of both the Sith and himself. He barely managed to keep his feet and found that the Sith was more off-balance than he was. Seeing his chance, he batted the Sith saber aside and cut the assassin in half from right shoulder to left hip. With that finish, the second explosion shook the building. After regaining his balance, he ran for the nearest exit. Callista was waiting for him in the shadow of an adjacent alley, and she pulled at him in the force. We should go before CSF gets here. We got what we came for, unless we need to hang around? She asked curiously. Zan was breathless, and with in between gasps he said, No, CSF can clean up this mess for a change. He took a deep breath. The last thing we need is to answer CSF questions. That's what I thought. She gently took him by the arm and guided him towards the speeder, taking the driver's seat this time as she guided it up and away from the scene and back towards the faintest hint of sunlight far above them. That was rather easy. Damn fool should have known better than to have tried playing the Sith and keeping the sabers close by. Some people never learn, even when their mistakes stare them in the face, she said softly, focusing on piloting. But at least we got them. Maybe now we can figure out what was so shabla important. The Sith standing by and waiting for Rhoda to make that mistake were weak. I don't understand. Why send weak assassins after something this big? Callista shrugged. Maybe it's another one of Bane's probes that Master Card's been talking about. I really don't know. It's obvious he's testing our responses to various things. Now that we have what we need, please tell me what Stefan said to you. He thinks that all of these events are connected somehow, as if Bane's testing our resolve. For what? I'm unsure. That's probably why he was looking for us this morning. We'd better find out what these things hold and then find out Stefan's battle plan. I would agree. She reached over with her free hand and squeezed his momentarily. We'll get to the bottom of it. Zan squeezed her fingers in return and smiled. I hope you're right, but I get the feeling we're only at the beginning. You too, hey? She said softly, falling silent as she guided the speeder through the traffic lanes and finally settled it gently to the temple's landing pad. Yeah, and I don't like where this is heading. It's starting to come together, but we're still behind. That was the overall theme of the entire affair as Stefan walked through the corridors of the temple. The sight he'd seen in his meditation showed Sith in armor, and it wouldn't be hard to figure out that they would be using materials resistant to lightsabers. So he had tasked the Jedi with doing the same. Several had gone through what archives were available and passed the knowledge on to others as they started to pull together the resources that would be needed. And that was just one side of the preparations he was keeping up with. He and Nib had modified the mobile suits that the New Republic would use over Endor, which were still being tested. Andrea was also splitting her time between testing and instructing the pilots. Stefan knew Ari would be good at handling operations on that side of things, but the Jedi still didn't know where Bane was staging his forces. Callista had found clues when she had tended to Mick, and now they would soon find out for sure. Sorry. Even without touching it, I can tell it was a Sith lightsaber, Callista said as Stefan walked into the room. There's so much evil emanating from this hilt. I don't even want to know how it will feel to read it. I'm afraid it's our only option, Stefan told her. Milano Voss is busy preparing other things, and Ari is busy as well. You are the only other Jedi I know of who has the ability to do this. I'd like to have an anchor for this if I'm going to delve into it, she answered. I can do that, Zan responded, taking her hand. I can keep you grounded, Calico. I'm going to keep my focus on you as well, Stefan said as they sat down around the first of the lightsaber hilts. Be very careful, Callista, and begin whenever you are ready. She took several deep breaths, clearing her mind and settling in. When she was ready, she started to reach out for the hilt. The closer her hand got to it, the more evil she felt coming from it. It was almost as if it was trying to repel her. It's wanting to fight me, she whispered, trying to focus harder. I feel it as well, Stefan said. I can sense a bloodlust coming from it. It has taken a lot of lives, Callista replied as she finally ran her bare fingers over the metal. It was so much different when she held it with her gloved. It was so much different than when she held it with her gloved hand. Force, I've not felt this kind of evil before, not even with Mephisto's blade. Cal, Zan started to say, such a desire to kill. This blade is evil. Focus, Callista, Stefan replied firmly. See if you can pull images. She frowned. Old buildings. A fortress or citadel, something like that. Warrior statues, she said as she delved into it before finally pulling her hand from the lightsaber. I've seen old hollows of Renvar. The images I'm seeing from the lightsaber look very similar. Renvar, Stefan said, nodding as he thought about it. It was almost a week away, even in hyperspace. He wrapped the hilt in cloth that it had been sitting on. What's going to happen to it now? She asked, relieved to have the feelings pass. The only thing we can do with it, Stefan said as he backed up. This is too dangerous for anyone. He tossed the hilt into the air. A split second after that, he drew his lightsaber. 2 strikes. One to where he felt the crystal, and the second crossed the power cell. The overload he caused almost vaporized the hilt completely. With his lightsaber returned to his belt as soon as he struck, he picked up the remaining pieces and stretched out with his senses. He was right. The source of the darkness was in the crystal itself. He had read that they could forge their own crystal, channeling the dark side through the materials. Such a strong sensation, Callista said, rubbing her hand. You won't need to read the other 3, Stefan told her, smiling. I think we have enough to know where they are. You did very well, Callista. One hurdle over, he thought to himself. As Stefan left, Callista leaned on Zan. That took a lot out of me. It was so dark. Her voice was subdued from the effort. Zan frowned. Did you get anything else besides the feelings from the sabers? I just think there's something more in play here. I mean, the mental feelings are one thing, but a Mandalorian likes hard evidence to go on. Callista frowned. Well, I did find minerals common to only Renvar on the bodies, besides the mental impression that confirms it for me. She pinched the bridge of her nose. Remind me not to do that again. It was hard to pull away at the end. Zan held her close, but he still frowned. You know, Calico, Stefan is going to be busy with the other developments. We may need to take this on ourselves. At that, she looked up at him. What do you mean? What I mean is, whatever these buildings are and whatever is held inside, we have to find it. Do you think Stefan, the Rogue, and the Alaran are going to be able to handle all of this? She tried to smile. Zan, they've been doing this kind of thing their whole lives. I've not faced war on this large a scale before. She buried her face in his shoulder for a moment. Zan growled. Calica, I'm serious. We could be overlooking something huge here. His control was fleeting, but a Mandalorian who was not grumpy about war and stayed out of the fight would be a new thing. I know, Seneca, she sighed, running a hand through her tousled hair. I'm still getting used to being on the front lines so much. She hugged him tightly. So, we know where they are, but why there, and why now? Is it because the Jedi are spread so thin? That adds to the fact that the New Republic has not been able to get a decent sensor array in place in the system, as well as the fact that Renvar is an interesting locale, and then it suits the Sith purposes. But I sense other factors in play here, but they're eluding me. Maybe Stefan could shed some light on that? He was looking for us earlier, if you remember. She shrugged, sensing that Stefan wasn't nearby, but would be talking to them soon. Is there anything else we can do in the meantime? Possibly, but I'd better do some digging of my own. Maybe go over Master Dell's holocron again. See if I'm missing information on something. Whatever I'm feeling, Calica, it's bigger than even the Sith. She blanched. Can I help at all? I'm not an archivist, but I've always been good at finding things. I could use the help. How's your skill in reading Huttese? Callista groaned. Horrid. Zan chuckled. Sorry, Sherika. He was a Hutt, after all. But take this as a language lesson. She grumbled, but then grinned. Mick would probably be smirking right about now. Figures that I would get a language lesson in the middle of all of this. She sighed. All right then, let's get to it. She then leaned up to kiss him gently before slipping her hand into his. Zan returned it and took her hand before heading towards the archives. Her tone was thoughtful. I never met Dell. What was he like? Zan smiled. He was a typical Hutt in most ways. Boisterous, intimidating, brash. But unlike Rhoda, his personality was more based on his love of life and knowledge. He was a good fighter as well. Not many got to see him in action, and none that did lived long enough to spread the knowledge. He was closer than a father to me. Callista felt the sorrow that passed over him, and she squeezed his hand tightly. What happened to your parents? Do you know? Zan shook his head. Naish. All I know is that they died on Tatooine when I was an Adik, and their deaths forced me to become a street rat in Anchorhead. If not pickpocketing, or at least attempting to pickpocket Dell, I wouldn't be here now. Callista closed her eyes briefly. I never knew what happened to mine either. All I ever knew was growing up under my master's teachings and meeting Master Card, and then when I went to the temple and met the general. Zan nodded. Dell was convinced that his apprentices should have ties to their own culture and lifestyles, so he did some digging on my family. He found out that my father was a Mandalorian mercenary and was on Tatooine for some business when he got killed. Dell then took it upon himself to train me as a Jedi and a Mandalorian. He even went through his own initiation in order to do so. Her eyes widened in surprise. How do you mean? The thought intrigued her, and she drew him to a bench looking out over the gardens. I didn't get Didn't get to more intense training until near the end of my time with Master Faulkner and into my training with Master Card. She squeezed his hand. How did he go through this initiation? I know the Mandalorians aren't as widespread as they were in times past. Zan grinned. You forget Dell's intelligence cover. As a full-fledged Hutt gangster with the credits in his personal account to back it up, and a few years ago many Mandalorians were inclined to look at a credit score more than honor. She cringed. That's not a very comforting thought. I hope that's changed since? Since Fett died, it's beginning to die out, Alec. But there are still rumblings, Zan told her sadly. She chewed her lip thoughtfully for a moment. Maybe we can help change that, if you want, she suggested quietly as she drew Zan to his feet again and they continued towards the archives. Zan smiled. You don't quite understand, Sierra. It's not a matter of just changing thought processes. The Duchess Satine tried, and look what that accomplished. She sighed. The people rebelled against it. These rumblings suggest that Mandalore is facing a similar challenge, and a similarly named body is against him. The Death Watch has risen again? Callista drew a breath in surprise. Is there anything we can do to help, or would he not welcome our help? I'm not sure. It's been a few years since I've been to Mandayam, and let's face it, Mandawade and Jatize never really got along well, except for Revan and the Exile. Her mouth quirked for a moment. The Mandawade have to face facts, though. They can't remain in the shadows forever. Zan nodded. However, that's in Mandalore's hands to choose when, not ours. Alec, just pointing out the obvious, she said with a smile. Let's go talk to Dell, shall we? Zan nodded, and they headed the rest of the way to the archives. We're just finishing up the final adjustments, Nib told Stefan as he walked into the hangar a few hours later. I'm still worried about Archangel, though. Why? Stefan asked as he looked over the mobile suit in question, which was sitting on the launch pad. With the upgraded systems, we haven't tested it yet to see if the parameters will fit the simulator. What about the sims Ari has been going through? He asked, looking surprised. I loaded up the old data we have from the first Archangel, and I'm hesitant about letting Andrea or one of my test pilots in the cockpit until I run some more checks. Why didn't you say so? Stefan said as he shrugged out of his robe. Open the hangar doors and extend the pad. Stefan, we've not even done a sim test yet, Nib said as she ran after him. You can't be serious. Load it up, Stefan said as he grabbed the zipline and rode up to the cockpit. Nib, I'm the best option to test her out. She finally looked up and nodded. Then she turned to her chief tech. Load her up, Chief. Okay, Stefan said as he plugged in the headset for the comm system. Are you there? Set up and ready, Nib said from the control room. All presets and preferences are loaded. All right, Stefan said, pulling up the HUD over the images from the suit's cameras, checking control surfaces. Archangel's wings were a unique design that Stefan had. The first one had wings that Nib had designed to look almost like actual avian wings. Stefan's idea took it a step further and designed certain feathers in them to contain maneuvering jets to give more precise control of the suit's movement. It was a radical new idea, and Nib was concerned about how much power it would consume. Full diagnostics complete, she said over the comm. We've got you cleared for the area where we've been testing the others. Tell you what, Stefan said as he brought the power systems up to full. Do an STC check and let control know I'm going up. Stefan, we've still got tons of data we need to get before we can. Nib, sometimes you have to run before you can walk. We're out of time. Archangel took off the platform with little effort. It almost felt like the controls were coming alive under Stefan's hands. The mobile suit spun and moved with such ease that it was hard to believe. I pulled the idea from Blue Talon's wing control system, he thought, as he pulled the mobile suit through the most extreme maneuvers he could think of. Handles like a dream, Nib. Are you getting this? Every bit of it. Sounds like you're having fun. Indeed, He was able to set the troubles aside for a moment while he was behind the controls of Archangel. Alright. Actually, that's right where I should be at 8 o'clock. Awesome. Alright. I'm going to pause for a hydration break. Chapter 15. The days were starting to blur together. Ari was in and out in a mad dash to organize the military for a strike against the Bothans and the Sith. Pilots were being assigned and trained on mobile suits as fast as they came off the production line. Between meetings with the High Council, the heads of command within the military, Ari would dash to the hangar to spend time with her own mobile suit, Archangel. Stefan and Nib had created a thing of beauty there, Mick had to admit, though he himself had yet to actually pilot one. He had been in a simulator a few times, but he had yet to really feel at home with the controls. His own time was sparse as it was. Fully reinstated after a solid week of paperwork and debriefings, Mick found himself in the simulator room nearly every waking hour, flying updated versions of every fighter craft the New Republic had to offer. The new XJs were a dream to work with, and he took to it like a calamari to water. On his own time, he would check out an XJ and fly strafing runs through asteroid belts. All the while, he was busy writing up a training regimen he planned to implement once the war was over. His own role in the war was, as yet, undetermined. Ari had hinted at a possible ground assault on the Sith homeworld, and Mick had argued strongly for his insertion into the command crew for that particular mission. Ari had hesitated, but conceded in the end that for the time being it was the best place to put him. The space and air arena would be dominated by mobile suits, and they needed the best and brightest down on the ground to deal with the Sith. As such, when he wasn't trying to sleep, Micron spent hours at a time working on the Firebird. Zane had come by a few times to lend a hand, and Brink was always ready to get dirty. After a day, she was space-worthy again. After a week, she was pacing the new Z-Wings in terms of speed. After 2 weeks, she was the fastest, deadliest freighter in the fleet. Mick presented the specs to Ari one night in a bid to have the Firebird as the command transport for insertion into Renvar. Whistling over the numbers, Ari agreed. With the Firebird primed and ready, Mick spent the new free time in the Jedi Temple training rooms. He first worked to find his limits and then to push them. He knew there had to be an answer to his current conundrum, though it eluded him. He spent nights meditating, focusing on the Force and the eddies and currents around him to try and catch a glimpse of a solution. It was out there. He could sense it. He sparred with Stefan as often as he could, honing his skills again against the Jedi's most celebrated swordsman. The matches ran 50-50 for the most part, and Mick had the distinct feeling that he wasn't the only one learning from each fight. You got in a lot of fights growing up, didn't you? Stefan asked one day after a particularly grueling bout. Actually, yeah. Mick arched an eyebrow. Just another part of life for an orphan scoundrel gone smuggler. Early on, it was the bullies at the outpost. Later, bar fights over sabbat games and women and booze. But how'd you gather that? Some of your movements, Stefan shrugged. There's a randomness to it that suggests the kind of chaos found in those types of scuffles. But there's also a deeper level of understanding that lends itself to experience. You also have an acute awareness of your surroundings without relying on the Force. Handy in a cramped place like a bar. Outside of that, it's just a feeling I had. Survival. Mick nodded. That's what I called it. It serves you well, Stefan said as they continued down the halls of the temple. Students bowed as they passed, and masters nodded their respects. There were several moments of silence, their booted heels echoing off the stone floor before Stefan spoke again. Are you ready for this? The rogue took a moment before answering. Yes, he said finally. I'll be careful, but I can't keep dwelling on this force, body, mind issue. It's been like running against an invisible wall. It's been affecting my connection to the Force. I've got the seed of worry now that I'm going to push too far and end up destroying my body, and it's causing me to doubt myself. I can't keep doing that. I might push too far and wind up hurting myself, but doubting myself will certainly kill me. There aren't many times when I would actually condone ignoring a problem. Stefan shook his head. Why does it make sense when you say it? You're the reader of fighters, Mick shrugged. You've beaten me 3 out of the last 4 fights. True enough, Stefan nodded. Though I was rather hoping it had more to do with my skills growing than you having some kind of existential crisis. Mick laughed and Stefan chuckled as they descended the steps to the temple hangar. The Firebird sat alone in the corner, Mick having moved her to the Jedi staging area. Together they hopped a shuttle to the palace and talked about the war to come. They'd be meeting with Ari at the apartment on the presidential level to pound out a finalized plan of attack to present to the High Council. Bane had not sent any new attacks or probes, but everyone, Jedi or no, could sense the coming storm. They had to be ready. Callista and Zan would be sitting in, adding an intelligence point of view to what would probably be a long roundtable discussion. Things were moving. Mick only hoped that it would be soon. Her black combat boots clicked on the steel floor as she paced in front of the hollow board, speaking clearly and slowly. Her BDUs were bloused properly and were distinctly different from her normal dress uniform. Ari was all business today. Micron, Stefan, Brink, Andrea, Zan, Callista, and Colonel Maxwell sat in the front row while the rest of Phoenix Squadron and several other squadron commanders sat behind them, intently listening to the battle plan. She had explained where the groups would meet outside of Renvar's orbit and when they would attack, as well as when the platoon shuttles would land with the ground forces. Mick, you, Zan, and Callista will lead the ground forces on Renvar for forward assist. Put pressure on their comm towers and their reinforcements. Place thermal detonators in their factories and get the hell out of there. Ari continued. Andrea, you, Brink, and I will lead the mobile suit forces while Colonel Maxwell takes command of the bridge of my flagship. He will direct the overall order of battle from orbit. Stefan, it's your pick. Oops. I'll stop there. 'Cause we're in an ad. Sorry. Oops. I can't type. You remember what I said at the beginning of stream? The chat cat is there for you to play with. Alright, and we're back. I took the opportunity to hydrate a little more since I'm reading a whole bunch. Stefan, it's your pick if you want to be on the ground or in a mobile suit. I leave that to you, brother. Any questions? Ari asked. The room was quiet, but most everyone had looks of confidence on their face. She felt confident as well. She had handpicked the Phoenix Squadron and her team leaders for this first strike. She knew they needed to win this one, but that many more battles were possible in the future. Yeah, it's the chat cat's there for everybody to play with. They met later at Ari and Mick's apartment. Stefan, Callista, Zan, Mick, Brink, and Ari sat in the living room on couches and recliners around the low Koshakian pine table. Micron sipped at a tumbler of whiskey. The others settled on beverages a bit less potent. It was a relaxed setting for what was, in actuality, a mini council of war. Callista gripped a mug of hot chocolate and tried her best to hide her anxiety. Zan gave her shoulder a squeeze and she smiled at him. So, that's it then? Mick finally spoke up. The High Council signed off on the war? More or less, Arya explained. The Senate agreed on a military strike against the Bothan and Anzadi forces. They feel it's a viable military threat to the New Republic. The Sith? Well, unfortunately, they couldn't be convinced of the threat they pose, the government as a whole. Most still view them as a religious sect, and none are willing to sanction what they view as a holy crusade between religious factions, and they won't accept Talon's information as definitive evidence to the contrary. Not entirely unexpected, Stefan said calmly. As you mentioned Renvar in the briefing earlier, Zan interjected, am I to assume you found some leeway? I have, Ari nodded. Though it's not much. Military intel has the Bothan and Anzadi forces massing at Endor. We'll be throwing all of our weight there. The mobile suit units, the Navy, everything. That's where I'll be. Meanwhile, I've sanctioned an exploratory mission to the Renvar system to ascertain a possible threat from there. The task force is comprised of a select group of commandos and other ground troops. They'll be jumping with the main task force from Coruscant, but splitting from the group once in deep space. The Jedi can be added to that exploratory mission. Unfortunately, it's all I can afford to send. It will be enough, Stefan nodded. Alright, I've submitted my request to be attached to the exploratory mission. I think I'll be best suited on the ground this time around, Mick said. Much as I'd love to blast a bunch of furballs out of the sky, I'm just not qualified to fly a mobile suit. I'll be leading the Jedi forces on Renvar, Stefan added. With Micron attached to the military units heading there, it will be easier to coordinate our efforts. Blue Talon will be missed above Endor, Ari started. Andrea will be flying Blue Talon, Stefan replied. Eyebrows rose at that remark, but no one spoke on the subject. If Stefan thought she was ready to handle Blue Talon, then she was. Well, with that decided, Mick said, yawning, I suppose we just need our orders. The rogue looked to Ari and threw his princess a wink. General. Well, then I order you all to do your very best to return to me all in one piece. I couldn't bear to lose any of you. Understood? Ari said, looking around the small group of family and friends. She slowly stood and exited the circle of chairs and couches that the group sat upon. She walked over to the picture window overlooking Coruscant and watched the night traffic whizzing by. I've never liked going to war, she began, but I've always felt it was necessary. If I did go, to defend the defenseless, to protect the weak. My gut tells me that this battle at Endor is only a distraction for what will happen on Renvar. Ari turned away from the window and looked at Brink and Mick with worried eyes. We've come down a long path, the three of us. She paused, trailing off. Shaking her head and not continuing on that sad train of thought, she straightened herself. We leave at dawn. Have your ships and supplies ready. I will see everyone off in the morning. Ari then reached over Mick's shoulder and snagged the bottle of whiskey away from the rogue. Quickly gulping down a couple of shots for herself, she hastily wiped her mouth and asked Stefan, Is Einar coming with you to Renvar? Callista's mouth quirked as she saw Ari down a good portion of the bottle before handing it back to Mick. Grabbing Zan's hand, she pulled him over to where Mick was again downing from the bottle himself. Mick, since Zan and I will be assisting you on the ground, we should talk strategy. She knew it might not be the best time, but it was the only time they had. Mick regarded her for a moment over the lip of the whiskey bottle before nodding. Have a seat, Callie. Zan. His lips quirked momentarily in his trademark grin. Well, Renvar's an ice ball, much like Hoth, so we've got cold weather gear. The snow could make visibility on the ground difficult, though. His hand smirked a little. For you, perhaps, not us. Heat visibility mode is a standard option on both of our HUDs. Snow won't hamper body temperature readings. Mick chuckled. I'd forgotten about that. Rather handy. He scratched his chin and thought, Our main goal here is to engage Bane. He's been He's been stabbing at us off and on again, testing us. The attack on Card's Boy, the ambush at the Revenge. He wanted our attention, and now he's got it. He paused for a moment, offering the whiskey bottle with a raised eyebrow. Zan frowned slightly. He's got our attention, all right, but this is the Sith we're talking about. Somehow this just seems too convenient. He scratched his head. Though none of my digging for information has found anything to suggest this is anything more than what we are facing. Callista looked over at him, an eyebrow raised. What have you felt, Zan? Maybe if you tell us it would help? Zan sighed. I wish I knew. It's vague. Mick frowned. All of us are having trouble pinpointing things where this is concerned. The only thing we can do is go in cautiously, as much as I hate to say it. Stefan knows Bane better than I do, so we'd best be on our guard. Ari wanted us to focus on their comm towers. However, that means we'll be handling a good deal of ground fighting and ground defense batteries. Sith troopers are not a group of Imperial stormtroopers, but they do have one thing in the Sith. Hold on. Sith are not a group of Imperial stormtroopers, but they do have one thing in common with the Sith advantage. Sheer numbers. They can use them as suicidal berserkers in order to hold us off, Zan said, grinning. Not that I mind, of course. More fun for me. What worries me is what we are looking for at the batteries. Mick frowned, looking towards Callista. She passed him a datapad. I did a bit of snooping of my own, she told him with a grin. What we're looking at here is several turbo laser emplacements and what could be a shield generator, but I'm unsure. She pointed out various items in the small hollow that floated above the datapad. Zan definitely didn't like the look of it. It'll be tough, but if we buy the rogue enough time, he could take it down himself, unless you're not up to the challenge, old man. Mick scoffed at Zan with a hurt look. I live for this kind of thing. What did you have in mind? He asked after a moment, offering the younger man a calculating glance over his whiskey glass. Well, if they paid attention to adequate defenses 101, then they would have positioned these batteries to overlap and provide the bulk of the defense to the generator tower. So, simply put, Calicut and I play distraction once we get through the troop lines, for you while you deal with whoever and whatever's in that tower. Mick nodded thoughtfully. We do have a force of Jedi at our disposal, but it's not as many as I'd like. He frowned, glancing over at Callista. I have a feeling we may need your services and those of your Padawan. Now it was her turn to frown, before she nodded. I'll brief Althea on the way then. I've made sure we have a good stock of medical supplies on hand. Zan nodded. The only thing that bugs me is that building to the west of the compound. It's undefended by, well, anything. Mick frowned, setting the whiskey glass down as he leaned closer to the hologram. Callista obliged, enlarging the image, which pixelated for a moment before stabilizing. It was still grainy, however. That's very odd, Mick said, almost to himself. Why would they leave such a gap in their defenses? Zan scowled and speculated. Civilian holding area? I mean, Sith are evil and all, but they prefer their slaves alive. Mick shrugged. If we can, we'll check it out while on the ground, but our main focus should be these defense batteries. Sorry. No chance we can get a squadron of Y-Wings to soften up Bane's ball boys? Zan quipped. Mick frowned. Unfortunately not, unless it's a Jedi squadron. The Senate didn't feel impressed to lend us military support in what they still see as a holy war. And not really an issue on the galactic scale. Zan frowned again. What I wouldn't give to get a squadron of Basilic and a bomb the Shabosisi back to the Stone Age. Then he caught Mick's quizzical look. Oh right, I forgot. Not caught up on the Mandela. Mick smirked. Try again, this time with the translation matrix? Zan smirked in reply. The Basilic, or what you call the Basilisk, is the newest product from Mendel Motors. It's a starfighter bomber that packs twice the firepower as a TIE Defender, and it's faster than even the Stealth X. Shibushi translates as asshats. Mick grinned. Looks like I'll need to brush up on my Mandoa. I like the way you think. It's a shame. It would even the odds in our favor by quite a bit. That caught Callista grinning a bit before she sobered. And look, it would indeed, but I doubt Mandalore would spare us even a flight right now. Zan shook his head. Not unless the Sith started to creep up on his borders, and even at that, it brings on other problems. And then he sighed. So all we got is what we have right now. Unless your wife can pull some magic on the New Republic chain of command, then we're stuck. She's already tried. Best we've got is some support from Admiral Drayson of Catan, though I think that might be going with Ari. Oh well, then we just do what we can, but this type of thing would make a good song to sing in battle if we win. He walked over and kissed his wife. I'm going to do some last-minute digging and meditating. I want to see if I can begin to piece together something to allay my fears. Callista frowned. Sure you don't want some company? She could sense something was nagging at him. Zan smiled. Nay, Calica, right now, though a pleasant distraction you'd be distraction nonetheless. I can't afford it right now. She sighed. All right, I need to go run some numbers myself and catch up with Mick a bit. I'll see you later. She saw Mick's lips quirk. He knew what that meant. She leaned up on her toes to kiss Zan deeply, earning a grin from Mick in response. She's all mine, Rogue, don't you forget that, Zan said, grinning as he departed. Mick grinned and called after him. You sound worried, Zan. You forget. I'm quite happily married to that beautiful vision over there. He pointed with his chin to where Ari was talking with Stefan. I just wanted to talk to Callista a bit. Sorry, we're switching viewpoints here. That's something I need to talk to you about, Stefan told Ari as he pulled her aside from everyone else and moved over towards the windows. You're still thinking about what happened on Korriban, she said as she read his expression when they got to the window. Aye, he said as he looked out. Whatever is bothering him, he's keeping it bottled up from me, I think especially from Kate. Ari shook her head slightly, taking another sip of her drink. Do I need to go talk to him? I'm debating the answer to that, Stefan told her as he looked to the rest of the group. I'd say you might want to meditate on it and make your call on what you feel. Personally, I think he needs to open up to someone, and he's not doing it. So you want to take him with you to Renvar? It's the only way I can keep an eye on him, Stefan answered. Is she still flying with Phoenix Squadron? Ari nodded. We've set it up to where there'll be fighter support from both the Republic and Katani groups for each mobile suit. Payne assured me that he's going to put his best pilots with the Phoenix pilots. A beep from his wristcom got his attention. It was a text-only message that soured his expression even more. You may not want to take long to think on it, he said as he sighed and looked out the window again. Einar? It was a message from Kate, actually, he said. I told her she could reach me if she needed to. Can you excuse me? Sure. Do what you need to. Stefan set his glass down and made the proper goodbyes to everyone in the room before he left Ari's apartment. How long? He asked as Kate met him at the door. Half an hour at least, she said. Stefan could tell that there was a trace of tears in the corners of her eyes. Master Card, I don't know what to do. He's not talking to me. Stefan sighed heavily and placed a hand on her shoulder. I'll see what I can do. Einar himself was sitting on the balcony at the temple, reaching for the bottle that he had brought with him, only to see the bottle fly, seemingly of its own will, off the balcony and through the open air to whatever street or rock below it. He turned around to see Stefan in the doorway, a sad look on his face. It didn't take him long to cross the distance between them and stand in front of his friend. Einar just looked at him. I think you've stonewalled me long enough, the Katani said as he sat down on the permacrete in front of him. You've got to tell me what happened. With the others gone to begin preparations, Mick, Ari, and Callista returned to the living room and sat back down on the furniture. Mick kicked his feet up on the low table, and Ari just as quickly swatted them down. The rogue sighed in mock exasperation and sipped at his tumbler of whiskey. So, Callie, Ari began, Mick and I have been talking. We wanted to wait to talk to you about it, but it seems the galaxy isn't going to let us have that time. You've been a wonderful student, but more than that, you've become part of our family. Mick and I would like to make that official. We'd like to adopt you. Seeing as you're an adult, Mick chimed in, we're not going to be telling you how to live your life or threatening to ground you when you screw up. He threw the young woman a wink. But we'll always be here for you if you need us, and by legally becoming our daughter, you'll have access to our resources should you need them. Which isn't to say that you wouldn't have those things anyway, Ari said. Regardless of your decision, our love for you remains the same. Adopting you is just a way to make things official and to show the rest of the galaxy just how much we care about you. Tears welled up in Callista's eyes as she looked from Ari to Micron sitting across from her on the Nerfide sofa. I don't know what to say, she stammered. I've been without a real family for so long. I'm not expecting you to start calling me Pops or something, Mick began, but his words were cut off as Callista rushed them both, wrapping her arms around them. Ari and Mick enveloped the young woman in a hug, embracing her as a daughter. Mick looked to Ari above Callista's head and caught a single tear glistening on her cheek. She smiled back at him, real joy in her eyes. Assuming that's a yes, Mick said, pulling back from the hug. He produced a piece of flimsy and a pen and set them on the table. We just need your signature here to make things official. Her hands trembling, Callista signed her name on the document and smiled at Ari and Mick. Thank you both, so much, she said, wiping tears from her eyes. This means the world to me. And you mean the world to us, Ari smiled. We'll get this pushed through tonight. Why don't you head home and try to get some sleep? You and Zane will be flying in with Mick and Stefan in the Firebird in the morning. Meet them in the temple hangar at 0800. I will, Callista said. She hugged them both once more before taking her leave. Micron could sense her happiness as she left their apartment, and he cast a genuine smile toward his wife. He didn't even have words, but he didn't need them. Ari caught his gaze and nodded, a broad smile crossing her face. Together, they relished the moment a while longer before rising themselves and putting the dishes away. It's a busy night, Mick said as he loaded the last glass into the dishwasher. And it's only just begun. Ari sighed. There's so much to do before we ship out tomorrow. I don't know if either of us will get any sleep tonight. Well, the bird's prepped and ready to go, and I've checked out some cold weather combat gear from our armory here on Coruscant. I've got enough for the Joint Command crew and a couple of extras if we should pick up any more. I think I'm mostly set. I've still got to fine-tune my saber and make sure it has a good charge, and I've also got to run a weapons check on the Firebird. But I'd be prepared to not sleep for a few hours with you first. Well, the plans have been laid and the troops have been briefed, Ari said as she let down her hair and started to unbutton her blouse a little bit. I just need to run pre-flight and weapons check on Archangel and make sure that Phoenix Squadron suits are good to go. I suppose I do have a few hours to kill. Mick tossed his shirt on the back of the sofa and gently kissed Ari deeply. She smiled before taking his hand and leading him back to the bedroom. The next morning, dressed in a freshly tailored black flight suit, his colonel tabs having been recently sewn on, Micron sat in the cockpit of his freighter as he ran through a complete systems diagnostic. So far, everything was checking in the green. The old freighter hummed happily beneath him, engines running smoother than they had in a life age. Permission to come aboard? A gruff voice called up the boarding ramp. Granted, Zan. Mick called back. Is Callie with you? Suited up and ready to go, Pops, she called. Mick could almost hear her giggle. The sounds of the Beskar-booted feet on the deck sole of the access corridor muffled her laugh. Mick turned to stare at two fully armored Mandos entering his cockpit. He leveled a finger at the smaller of the two and shot her a mock glare. I told you, young lady, he said. No calling me Pops or old man or anything of the sort. You asked for it, old man, Zan said, eyeing the instruments. You adopted her. Mick just shrugged. Seemed like the thing to do at the time, he said, throwing Callie a wink. Joking aside, Zan said, what's the order of business for the flight to Renvar? Well, first we're rendezvousing with the fleet for a coordinated jump-out system, Mick explained as he looked over his orders. It shouldn't be longer than an hour. Then we split and head our separate ways. The trip to Renvar will take a standard day at the speed of the troop transports we'll be heading in with. We leave hyperspace at the edge of the system before micro-jumping directly to Renvar. Once in hostile space, I'm going to have you two in the gun turrets. I assume you've had experience with rotational quads? I'm going to pretend you didn't ask me that, Zan deadpanned. Good, Mick smiled as he plunged on. Stefan's going to be co-pilot, and if Einar shows, I'll put him in the navigator's chair. That pretty much makes up the whole of the command crew. I've got weapons and gear stowed in the crew pit lockers for when we make planetfall. How were we being inserted to take down that tower? Callista asked. Oh, that's where things get fun, Mick grinned. Once inside the atmosphere, I'm dropping the Firebird to the deck and doing some terrain-following maneuvers to get near the Sith base. Once we get close enough, Stefan will take the controls, and the three of us move to the cargo ramp in the back. He's going to do some low-altitude flybys above the tower with the ramp lowered. We go out the back while Stefan takes the bird back to the forward LZ to rejoin the troops. We have jetpacks, Zan said. It won't be a problem for us. How exactly are you planning on surviving the fall? A glider will just get you shot out of the air. Oh, you'll see. Mick winked. I've got to keep some secrets. Otherwise, there's no fun in it. Fun. Right, Zan repeated. Oh, here comes Stefan now. Mikron pointed out the forward viewport. They could just see the Gatani master threading his way through crew techs and Jedi. Myriad transports sat warming up and preparing. Stefan nodded to several masters and threw a salute to the chief tech as he wound his way towards the Firebird. Better go strap yourselves in, Mick said. Once Stefan's on board, it won't be long. And that is the end of chapter 15. I promise there are more. I apparently forgot to edit them, but there are a few more chapters after this. So, but that tells you how long it's been since I haven't looked at these. It's been a long time. But I hope you enjoyed. And I'm really enjoying actually sharing these stories with you. They've been a thing for over 20 years, so it's really nice to be able to share my passion with everyone. So very, very grateful for the opportunity, and anybody who who likes to drop on by. Well, thank you. I was hoping that was the case. A lot of the stories that I'm reading right now actually are ones that I haven't honestly touched in probably 15 years. So going back and editing them is really interesting because they were written. The first couple of series were actually written when I was in high school, so there's a huge shift in grammar, especially because the earlier stories were written cooperatively when there was a group of about five or six of us. So the grammar and the perspective will change frequently, so it's a little hard with scene shifting sometimes, but that's something that I'm trying to work on. I'm trying to make it a little bit smoother, so it's taking time. But thank you so much for everybody that's here. I saw Harpax lurking somewhere. He's one of my mods. And anybody else that was here this evening, thank you very much. You're not invisible, Harpax. You don't have a stealth field. I see you. Alright. So our next stream is You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Our next scheduled stream is going to be next Wednesday. And then I was supposed to stream on Sunday, May 5th, but I have cancel that stream, mainly because I will be out camping and don't know when I'm getting back. So just figured it was wise to kind of preemptively not stream that evening because I will probably be very tired. So I will see everybody on Wednesday, and I look forward to continuing reading To All Things an End with all of you. I'm really enjoying actually delving back into these stories after so long. I find the stories just fascinating, so I'm really glad to be able to share them. Oh, yes, I'm definitely looking forward to it. I'm going to be camping with my youth group, so that should be really fun. Get away from civilization and technology for a few days. Hopefully the weather cooperates. Sometimes it doesn't, but hopefully it will work in our favor. So I will... Oh, I'm actually ending a little bit early tonight, but that's okay. Harpax, do you have a recommendation for somebody we could raid? I don't know who's live right now. I'm not looking at Twitch. I didn't... Oh, I don't have her... Okay. I can probably find her. Oops. Okay, yes, she is. Alright. Okay, so Lila Rose is a friend of mine, and she is a variety streamer. She plays Dead by Daylight, she plays Fallout 4, many other games. I've known her a couple of years through various other streamers and other communities, and really, really good vibes, really chill, just quiet, safe space, nerdy games, nerdy chat, cool stuff. So let's go say hi to Lila. Let me get our raid message going. And the cat's gonna yell at me. Yeah, it's gonna yell at me. And I actually need to pull it up on Twitch because it doesn't for whatever reason in oops. Can I snooze that ad? Can I snooze that ad? No. No. Oh. We have an ad. Crap. Okay. It's not gonna let me snooze. Rude. Alright, well. Course, right as I'm getting ready to read out. Let's see. We got 37 seconds. Alright. So as soon as we're back from the ad break, I will... Okay. Yeah. Alright, and we're back. As I was saying, Lila Rose is a good friend of mine. She's a variety streamer, really chill, good vibes, really big supporter of mental health, and just all around awesome person. Actually, me streaming, reading my stories is part of my mental health as you know, as mentally taxing as streaming can be. I find that of the things that I could stream, reading is actually helping me. It's my kind of chill time at the midweek point, which is a great time for me to actually do it. So I'm hoping that for those of you that are here, that it gives you time and space to unwind in the middle of the week and just kind of chill out. And definitely, if you have any questions or comments or suggestions for the stream, please feel free to reach out to me in DMs or on Discord. We actually have a Discord if you're interested. There we go. So please feel free to join the Discord if you like. No pressure if you don't. But you can definitely reach out to me in DMs on Twitch, or if you have me on Discord, you can reach out to me that way with suggestions for the stream. And let's get raiding to Miss Lila. I'm going to post our raid message again, and the cat's going to yell at me. So, anyway, have a good evening, everybody. And I hope that the rest of your week is productive and relaxing. And have a great night. And we're going to go to bed. Well, we're going to end stream and go raid Lila. So, and let's get started here.